Does America know about aliens? Does it have proof about alien UFOs? And is it hiding that proof? I ask because a sensational claim is making waves. Listen to this.
UAP are in our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine.
UFOs are real, he says, and no, this is not from a Hollywood film. This happened in the US Congress. This claim was made by a group of lawmakers. They were told that America knows about aliens, although, as you heard, he used a different term, non-human beings, also unidentified aerial phenomena. Trust Americans to be dramatic. They're talking about aliens and UFOs. And who are these speakers? Former members of the US defense establishment. They worked for the Pentagon. Some flew military planes, others analyzed intelligence. This week, they appeared before American lawmakers from both parties. They're conducting hearings, apparently to find out the truth about aliens. So they've summoned witnesses, and these proceedings have attracted global interest for obvious reasons. We heard the testimonies, they're extraordinary. Take, for example, the testimony of a man called Ryan Graves. He's a former American Navy pilot. He told lawmakers about a training session. No dates were mentioned, but here's how the story goes. 2 F-18 Super Hornets were in the air. They were flying in formation. Suddenly, a UFO appeared. And what happened next? Why don't you hear it from the horse's mouth?
2 F-18 Super Hornets were split by a UAP. The object, described as a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere, came within 50 feet of the lead aircraft and was estimated to be 5 to 15 feet in diameter. The mission commander terminated the flight immediately and returned to base.
He says UAP, that's unidentified anomalous phenomenon, what's more commonly called a UFO, unidentified flying object. So what happened after the pilots returned? Graves told American lawmakers that a safety report was submitted, and that's the last that he heard of it. He doesn't know if any action was taken on that report. But this is just one story. Apparently, there were more encounters and more mysterious events. Our next account is from a man called David Fravor. He's a retired US Navy commander. He too delivered a testimony. Fravor was once flying an F-18 jet, and he noticed something strange.
As we looked around, we noticed that we saw some whitewater off our right side. It's important to note that the weather on this day was as close to perfect as you could ask for off the coast of San Diego. Clear skies, light winds, calm seas, no whitecaps from waves. So the whitewater stood out in a large blue ocean. All 4 of us, because we were in F-18Fs, so we had pilots and Wizzo in the back seat, looked down a small, saw a white tic-tac object with a longitudinal axis pointing north-south and moving very abruptly over the water like a ping-pong ball.
A small white object moving over the water like a ping-pong ball, he says. At the risk of sounding repetitive, let me remind you, this is not from a movie. All these testimonies happen in real life, and we saved the most sensational one for the last. The third witness, his name is David Grush. He's a former intelligence official. He worked in the US Defense Department, that's their defense ministry, and what did he do there? He was on a task force about UFOs, so perhaps he knows better than all the others. And what did Grush say? He said America has had long-standing covert programs. Some date back to the 1930s. And he then went on to talk about aliens. He told lawmakers that the US government has some materials. They are of, quote-unquote, non-human origin, and they were taken from some crash sites. Listen to this.
Has the U.S. government become aware of actual evidence of extraterrestrial, otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? And if so, when do you think this first occurred?
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open, both scientifically. Right. Certainly, like I've discussed publicly previously, 1930s.
Again, this is on-record testimony, and Grush had more to say. He spoke about a reverse engineering program where crashed vehicles were tested. I have that statement with me. Listen to this. I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program to which I was denied access. So he did not see it for himself, but he claims the program did exist. And this is quite a claim. The Pentagon has been quick to rubbish it. They have, in fact, released a rebuttal. Let me quote from it. The Defense Department task force does not have any verifiable information to substantiate claims that any programs regarding the possession or reverse engineering of extraterrestrial materials have existed in the past or exist currently. In other words, the Pentagon says it does not know anything. But convincing the skeptics will be hard. Aliens and UFOs still sound like a far-fetched idea. And look at the careful choice of words. Non-human doesn't really mean alien. It could even be a plant or a sample of something else maybe. So there is still little tangible evidence except for videos like this one. These are unclassified videos. They were part of a US intelligence report.
Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at that, look at it fly. Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. Nickel 6-1 Tango Logic, over. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at that, look at it fly.
So what are those flying objects? The US government said they do not know. In 2021, they released a report. It said there are no extraterrestrial links to these objects. So there is simply too little information to make a decision. But American lawmakers were not satisfied. They saw this as a cover-up, so they called for these hearings, and it has stirred up the hornet's nest again. Do aliens exist? Honestly, we don't know. And if you ask me, there are far bigger and more urgent questions that we need to answer first.
Xinhua News Agency has released information on this issue. You can check it out. The information on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is updated in accordance with relevant management regulations. Next question. The relevant decisions of the 4th session of the Standing Committee of the 14th National People's Congress and the order of the President of the People's Republic of China are very clear. You can refer to them. I have no information to provide on this question. Next question.
Foreign Minister, could you...
I have no information to provide. I still recommend you to check the news released by Xinhua News Agency.
From China's Foreign Minister.
I have already answered this question. Information is on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We update it according to the relevant management regulations. I have no information to provide. Next question. I have no information to provide. Next question.
Next question, please.
I have already introduced the relevant situation. Next question. Xinhua News Agency has released the news, but I don't have any more information. Next question.
It's the new Houdini Act. Forget escaping from a tank of water or pulling out rabbits from your hat. China has just pulled off the greatest magic trick ever. Their foreign minister has vanished. It's like he never existed. Just go to China's foreign ministry website, search Qing Gang. You will get 0 results. President Xi Jinping has around 400 articles. Wang Yi has around 700 of them. Now, Wang Yi is Qing Gang's predecessor and successor. You can see statements about his visits from the last decade. But all information on Qing Gang has been purged. He's been erased from official records. If cameras did not exist, neither would Qing Gang. We just showed you how the Chinese government is handling the situation. They have no answers to give, none whatsoever. Reporters posed around 20 questions. Every time the answer was the same. I have no information. Please refer to the media release. And what does this media release say? It has one sentence about Qing Gang's sacking. It says he's been removed from the post of foreign minister. And now I don't know about China, but here in the real world, we have something called context. We like to know why and how things happen. The world still doesn't know the reason behind Qin Gang's sacking. As a result, there is speculation. Some say he had an affair, that his alleged girlfriend recently gave birth in the US. Others say there is a corruption probe, that Qin Gang was implicated in something shady. And finally, health concerns. Maybe Qin Gang is sick. That's what the Chinese government said last month. But days later, he got the sack. The last time we saw him was on the 25th of June in Beijing. It's been more than a month. In this time, he's not just been sacked, he's also been missing. We are talking about a senior cabinet official here, the man in charge of China's foreign policy. How does someone like that disappear? Well, the answer is quite simple. Because the Chinese regime wants him to disappear. High-profile crackdowns are not uncommon in China. Businessmen and celebrities have vanished for months on end. They do turn up eventually, but by then they're very different people. More compliant, more loyal, and more silent, basically more communist. Could something similar happen to Qin Gang? The foreign ministry refuses to say. They claim they're opposed to malicious hype. Listen to this.
The relevant information on appointments and dismissals has been released in a timely manner from the Chinese side. We're always opposed to malicious hype surrounding this matter.
If only they could end all this hype and speculation. Well, they can. Just tell the world what happened. We know there is no point speculating about Qin Gang's disappearance, so let's focus on something else. What does this entire episode say about China? A, they're opaque and secretive, and B, they don't care what the world thinks. Both of these issues should ring alarm bells for the world. China is a country of 1.4 billion people. They make up 18% of the global GDP, around 15% of global trade. They have more than 400 nuclear warheads. They occupy a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Like them or hate them, you cannot ignore them. China's policies have a huge impact on global economy and politics. Xi Jinping has been open about his ambitions. He wants China to become a global superpower. But for that, he will need trust. Other countries must feel confident about China. And how do you do that? Certainly not by hiding your top diplomat. This sort of secrecy can have devastating consequences. We saw that during the Wuhan virus pandemic. They tried to hide the outbreak until the last moment. They kept lying about the virus, and that delay cost all of us. And that tells you how dangerous secrecy can be. Secondly, what is the world supposed to do now? Qin Gang met dozens of foreign ministers. He also visited India in March this year. I'm sure he had important conversations with Indian officials. Do those talks still matter? Or have they also been erased from China's memory? What about his policy initiatives? Do they still stand, or have they been forgotten as well? Do you see the problem here? This incident will erode whatever little trust China had left. If officials are so expendable, who do you negotiate with in Beijing? I guess Xi Jinping himself. But even the president has lost some of his credibility here. He handpicked this man, Qin Gang, sort of like his foreign policy protege. But within months, he's had to fire him and make him disappear. It's not a good look for the wise and all-knowing chairman, is it? Such incidents should be a cautionary tale for the world, a warning against Chinese superpowerdom. If it's the foreign minister today, it could be anyone tomorrow. Imagine all of us start trading in the yuan, the Chinese currency, and the next day China's central bank chief disappears. Good luck trying to limit the fallout then. The fact is, China needs to give some answers on what has happened. If the truth is unpalatable, maybe even try some propaganda. But stonewalling is not an option, because right now the fire-breathing dragon is a laughing stock. Meanwhile, in Russia, the president is on a charm offensive. Vladimir Putin is hosting the Russia-Africa Summit. The first edition was in the year 2019. It was held in Sochi. It is Russia's largest resort city. What's happening now is the second edition. The theme for this year is peace, security, and development. And that's what's on the agenda. Growing cooperation, promises of deals, security guarantees, all with a sprinkle of geopolitics. The summit started with a bang. Putin's first promise was free grains to Africa.
We will be ready in the next 3 to 4 months to provide for free to Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, Central African Republic, Eritrea, with 25 to 50,000 tons of grain, and we will ensure free delivery of these products to consumers.
Now some context here. Ukraine accounts for 9% of global wheat exports. This grain makes its way to markets through the Black Sea. In July 2022, Russia and Ukraine struck a deal. It was called the Black Sea Grain Deal. Ukrainian grain would reach the world and Russia would not attack the ships or stop them. That was the deal. But last week, Russia walked out of this deal. And since then, global food prices have been on the rise. Africa too was alarmed. The continent depends on much of this Ukrainian grain, and rising food prices do not bode well for its leaders. They could face protests or worse. So Putin is now making up for that. He's promising to cover up for Ukrainian grain, and he's offering some of it for free.
Our country can replace Ukrainian grain both commercially and as free aid to the poorest countries in Africa, especially as we are again expecting a record harvest this year.
But grain wasn't the only thing on the mind of African leaders. The other issue bothering them is the Wagner Group. We've told you about the coup, how their leader challenged Vladimir Putin and got himself exiled. Now the fighters are all over the place, but in Africa, Wagner has a considerable presence. They're seen as an extension of Moscow's influence. Africa relies heavily on the Wagner Group. They provide security in exchange of gold. So this will be an urgent issue for African countries like the Sudan, Mali, Libya, and the Central African Republic. And what does Russia have to say? Well, the same old. Wagner's work in Africa will continue as usual. But Moscow doesn't say who will be responsible for their actions. I guess that's up to Africa to figure out. There were also some promises of financial cooperation. Listen to this.
In order to further expand the entire range of trade and economic ties, it is important to move more energetically in financial settlements on trade transactions to national currencies, including the ruble.
So grain, security, and money. That's what the summit focused on. But was that the real aim of this extravaganza? You see, Putin is isolated on the global stage. He waged a war last year, and since then, the West has shunned him. So he's looking for alternatives and pockets of support. He wants to exert his influence on Africa. And how will he do that? He cannot travel to Africa. There's an arrest warrant against him from the International Criminal Court. Flying down would be a risk. So Putin chose the second best alternative, which is inviting all of these leaders to Russia. In fact, it was a perfect opportunity for him to hold center stage before all these African leaders. But the guest list might be a dampener. Putin expected a full-packed auditorium. What he's got is a lot of empty seats. 49 African delegations were invited this year. Only 17 RSVP'd. It's a sharp fall from 2019 when 43 leaders visited Russia. And what explains this dwindling guest list? Moscow blames the West for it. It says Western nations tried to sabotage the event. I have the statement from the Kremlin spokesperson. And this is what he said. Virtually all African states have been subjected to unprecedented pressure from the US, and French embassies on the ground have not been sleeping either, along with their Western missions, who are also trying to do their bit to prevent this summit from taking place. So Moscow says African countries were subjected to unprecedented pressure. But is that really what's happening? The Ukraine war has divided the world. Countries were quick to choose sides. Africa did not. It has been mostly neutral. African countries did not want to get drawn into a Cold War-like situation. They wanted to avoid camp politics. Also look at Russia's footprint in the continent. It has a high profile, yes, but not enough investment to show for it. In 2019, Putin vowed to double bilateral trade within 5 years, but that's not happening. Trade is stalled at $18 billion per year. Foreign direct investment is abysmally low, and Russia doesn't offer much aid either. So while Putin's African dream promises may sound impressive, his USP is diminishing. There are other compelling dreamers in the mix, the likes of China, the United States, and France. They're all vying for influence in Africa. And they're also pumping in a lot of money. Putin knows that a few favors here and there are crucial to secure trust. thus the free grains. But will he be able to match up with investments in the long run? Will his promises hold up? Or will they just disappear like a mirage in the Sahara? The Pacific Islands are having a busy week. French President Emmanuel Macron is in town. He's on a 5-day visit to the region, and he's currently in Vanuatu. It's a country in the southwestern Pacific Ocean, Vanuatu. Its population is around 330,000. Macron was given a traditional welcome by the government there. He attended a cultural event. He held talks with Vanuatu's Prime Minister, and then he dropped a statement, the kind that you expect newspapers and channels to pick up immediately. The French president said, there is a new imperialism in the Pacific. Listen to this.
A new imperialism is emerging in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in Oceania, and a logic of power is threatening the sovereignty of many states, the smallest and often the most fragile.
So what exactly is Macron talking about? You see, the Pacific has become a battleground, a new battleground. It has traditionally been America's backyard, but in the last decade or so, China has made giant strides. So now it's a race. This month, China signed a policing deal with the Solomon Islands. Before that, the Americans struck a deal. They signed a defense agreement with Papua New Guinea. In fact, Joe Biden's top officials are in the Pacific right now. Foreign Minister Antony Blinken is in Tonga. Defense Minister Lloyd Austin is in Papua New Guinea. But which side is Macron on? You would think he's with America, but he isn't. The French president is offering a so-called alternative. He says he's against hegemony and confrontation. So he's pitching the French way. The question is, can he back it up? France does have presence in the Pacific Ocean, and I do not mean warships or aircraft carriers. France has sovereign land in the region. New Caledonia, French Polynesia, and Wallis and Futuna. France owns these territories. Around 1.6 million French citizens live here. Their exclusive economic zone spans almost 9 million square kilometers. My point is, France is a Pacific power, which is also why Macron's declaration is problematic. Yes, there is new imperialism in the region. America is taking over military bases. China is taking over policing duties. But what moral ground does France have? These Pacific territories are vestiges of French colonialism. Some of them have tried to break free. In 2021, New Caledonia held a referendum. Around 96% of the population chose to stay with France, not break free. There are pro-independence groups, but they boycotted the last vote. So before talking about new imperialism, maybe acknowledge the old one. President Macron has not described his Pacific plan in detail, but there are 3 broad themes. 1 is more political and military engagement. 2, more development aid. And 3, help against natural disasters. You see, Pacific Islands are on the front lines of climate change. It is their most pressing problem. But why is Macron pitching an alternative? Would it not be easier to join the Americans? Well, technically, yes. But there are 2 reasons why Macron is going alone. The first is AUKUS, the submarine alliance between Australia, the UK, and the US, AUKUS, AUKUS. France was supposed to be building these subs for Australia, but that deal was snatched from them. And what's worse, there was no heads up. The announcement was a total surprise for France. And since then, Macron has pursued an independent Indo-Pacific policy. He's even reached out to India for that. So that's one reason. The second reason is more elaborate. French leaders, including Macron, are not happy being junior partners. They have bigger dreams. Call it Napoleonic tendency or strategic autonomy, but that is the truth. Meet Charles de Gaulle. He was president of France in the 1960s. His policies were aimed at creating a supranational Europe, not a lackey of the US, but a counterweight. That's what he wanted. He wanted to create a European army. He also downgraded France's membership in the NATO. In 1966, France exited NATO's military command structure. They rejoined only in the year 2009. So France has always had big ambitions, but Macron is cut, and perhaps Macron is cut from the same cloth. He has also proposed the creation of a European army. In the month of April, he had some tough words for the US. He said Europe cannot be America's follower. So the intent has been there, not just now, but even 60 years back. Which brings us to the question, what is holding France back? Well, in Macron's case, it is politics. He is an embattled leader at home. He has been pushed from one protest to another. In such situations, you cannot really spend much time on foreign policy. That is one problem. The second is the lack of economic heft. France's share of the global GDP is just 3%. The US makes up 24%. China makes up 18%. In fact, Germany, Japan, India, and the UK rank above France. Does that mean Macron's Pacific push is doomed to fail? Well, maybe not. His talk of a middle ground will attract attention for sure. If you align with the US or with China, the risks are higher. They may talk about peace and strategy, the US and China, but let's be clear, both these countries want staging grounds in the Pacific. No one is asking the Pacific countries what they want. Do you know what they want? Climate action. They need funds, knowledge, and resources to tackle climate change. It's a pressing issue for them, an existential issue. It's way more important than Taiwan or the South China Sea. If you can give them that, you can build lasting partnerships. Now let's come to a story both closer to and further from home. India and its space sector. A new report is out. It says India's space industry could hit $100 billion by 2040. $100 billion. It's a staggering number. It would have been inconceivable some 50 years ago. That's when India's space journey began in the year 1969. India grew, beating all expectations. The more the world disted, the higher it aimed. Today, India's space industry is growing twice as fast as the rest of the world, and it's using this growth for global good. Our next report tells you more.
3, 2, 1, 0.
What do you think of when you hear the term India's space sector? Perhaps the Indian Space Research Organization, also known as ISRO. Maybe you think of ISRO's recent Chandrayaan-3 lunar mission that's trying to land on the south side of the moon as we speak. Or perhaps the regular satellite launches from Indian installations, often for other nations. Since 1999, India has launched 381 satellites for 34 countries, and that has brought in about $279 million. So India has been making a name for itself in the commercial space race. Both the scientific and commercial Indian space ventures have been growing by leaps and bounds. And the commercial in particular is gaining global recognition. A report has just been released by Arthur D. Little. It's a consultancy firm headquartered in Belgium, and it predicts phenomenal growth in India's space industry. The report says India's space sector could reach revenues of $100 billion by 2040. That's the best case scenario. At the very least, the space sector could bring in $40 billion annually by the end of the next decade. These are very encouraging numbers. India's space industry generates about $8 billion in revenue at present. So it is predicted to grow anywhere between 5 to 12.5 times in the next 18 years. That's a minimum prediction of 5-fold growth, going up to 12.5 times. It's far ahead of the rest of the world. At the very least, India's space sector is expected to grow at twice the global average, which it's already doing. India's space sector currently grows at about 4% annually compared to the world average of 2%. So the country is already outperforming the world. If it just stays on its present course, India's space sector should hit $40 billion by 2040. But in order to max out its growth, India needs to change a few things. According to Arthur D. Little, to hit $100 billion in space revenue, India can do the following things. Enact clear and comprehensive space regulations, strengthen space equipment manufacturing capabilities, encourage foreign investments in satellite facilities, use production-linked incentives to become a satellite manufacturing hub, collaborate with international companies through joint ventures and acquisitions, support early-stage space startups, and build a skilled workforce to work in the space sector. It's a lot of work. But India seems keen to put in the effort to modernize. the Indian space sector is already opening up to privatization. Earlier this month, India began a bidding process for the manufacturing and development of the SSLV rocket program. SSLV stands for Small Satellite Launch Vehicle. These are relatively low-cost rockets that can be used to launch lightweight satellites. They were designed by ISRO and will eventually be made by private companies. So far, 20 firms have reportedly expressed interest in the SSLV manufacturing deal, which means the move to the next stage of India's space industry is underway. The country's space sector has come a long way since its humble beginnings in 1969. Back then, the world didn't believe India could do it. After all, India was a country with tremendous poverty. It was always extremely talented, blessed with some of the best scientific minds. People like Vikram Sarabhai, Homi J. Bhabha and APJ Abdul Kalam, among a host of others. But despite this, no one thought India could fulfill its lofty dreams. And so, no nation really offered to help. Fast forward to about 50 years later, and we get this Arthur D. Little report. Now this is just one report, and India still has a lot to do to achieve its goals. But finally, it seems the world is waking up to its immense potential.
Now let's talk about what's going on in Niger. There seems to have been another coup in the country. For those of you who may not know, Niger is a landlocked nation in West Africa. It's home to more than 25 million people, and this is the fourth military coup it is facing since it gained independence from the French in the year 1960. The fourth one in about 6 decades. It's the same story playing out in West Africa. The region is notorious for both regular coups and extremist militant insurgencies. And the latest coup in Niger is likely to fuel more instability in the region. Here's a report.
This is the country of Niger, and that's where the capital, Niamey, is located. It's where a coup attempt is underway against President Mohamed Bazoum. Yesterday, he was detained by members of his presidential guard. The presidential palace was then sealed off. But as of this morning, Bazoum was still defiant. He tweeted this at about 10 a.m. He said Niger's hard-won democratic gains will be safeguarded. The country's military, however, seems to have other ideas. Yesterday, after they detained the president, members of the military released this statement.
This day, July 26, 2023, we, the Defense and Security Forces, meeting within the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, CLSP, have decided to put an end to the regime you know. This follows the continuing deterioration of the security situation and poor economic and social governance.
Notice that an armed forces member read out this statement while flanked by 9 troops. It looked like a show of force. At the time, it was uncertain how much of the military was involved. Today, the rest of the country's military leadership has backed the coup. The army's chief of staff said the priority was to avoid destabilizing the country. Yes, the coup backers apparently don't want instability. The armed forces are also shutting down Niger's democracy.
All political party activities are suspended until further notice.
This could have been a response to what transpired yesterday. The president's supporters had taken to the streets.
We are here to defend democracy, we are here to defend the republic, we are here to show our commitment to the rule of law and to say no to any attempt to seize power by force or arms.
The coup plotters had to fire warning shots to drive the crowd away. The military also took control of all roads leading to the national television station. Concerts and movies were broadcast all day, seemingly in an attempt to keep the people calm. Meanwhile, the coup has drawn widespread international condemnation.
The Secretary General is following closely the situation in Niger. He condemns in the strongest terms any efforts to seize power by force and to undermine democratic governance, peace, and stability in Niger. The Secretary General calls on all actors involved to exercise restraint and ensure the protection of constitutional order. The United Nations stands by the government and people of Niger.
The Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, have condemned the coup attempt. So has the African Union. The head of the African Union, who is in Russia for a summit, issued this statement from the podium today.
I joined with the African Union and the communique it issued to strongly condemn the events in Niger, recommend the re-establishing of the constitutional order, and demand the immediate release of President Bazoum and his family.
So there's definitely resistance to the coup. But will it matter? Both Niger and the West Africa region as a whole is quite used to military takeovers. This is Niger's fourth coup since it gained independence in 1960. And there have been multiple failed coup attempts in the past. When Bazoum became president, that was the first peaceful democratic transition of power in Niger. Every other presidency has ended with a coup. And like we mentioned, the entire West Africa region is used to armed forces taking control. Look at this list beginning from just 2000. Burkina Faso, 3 coups, 2 of which took place last year. Mali, 3. Guinea, 3. There was a coup in the neighboring Central African nation of Chad in 2021. These countries have suffered 7 coups since 2020. Instability and military impunity are rampant, which is why it's no surprise that militancy thrives in the region. Al-Qaeda, ISIS and Boko Haram all operate in the area. The region's militaries are supposed to be fighting the terrorists, but instead they're too busy toppling elected governments. And all the while, sandwiched between power-hungry troops and religious extremists are West Africa's citizens.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with the United States. A burning crane came crashing down from a high-rise in Manhattan. The crane was carrying 16 tons of concrete. 2 firefighters and at least 9 other people have been injured. Meanwhile, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell just experienced the longest 19 seconds of his life. So did everyone else in the room. No, they did not do a plank together. McConnell went abruptly quiet in the middle of a news conference. Everyone was confused. He was then escorted away. And when he came back, he said he was fine. In London, tiger cubs had a fun time in a zoo. They soaked in the sun, chilled on a swing and called it a day. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1953, the Korean armistice was signed, ending the 3-year-long war. The Korean Civil War began in 1950. The 3-year-long bloody struggle left millions of people dead. The two countries never really signed a peace deal. So they're technically still at war. With that, we call it a wrap. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
This week has been good bipartisan cooperation and a string of
Okay, Mitch? Anything else you want to say, or should we just go back to it?